It's UofL Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
Welcome to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. So glad you're joining us. Hopefully you'll stick around for the next 30 minutes or so. I think we've got an interesting show lined up about things going on at the University of Louisville, including, as you'll hear in just a few minutes, a young lady who was a journalist and went into North Korea. And she went undercover in North Korea, went to work as a school teacher, came back out with a book about that closed society and its people. Her name is Suki Kim. She's a journalist and best-selling author, as I said, who went undercover, and she was at UofL last month, and I had an interview with her, and we'll have that coming up in the second half of the show. But first, the opioid abuse epidemic is producing new babies being born with addictions to opioids at a rate 5 times what it was a decade ago. Dr. Lori Devlin is in the UofL Department of Pediatrics and worked on a study of neonatal opiate withdrawal syndrome, better known as what? NOWS, I guess?
NOWS is the terminology, yes.
All right. Well, Dr. Lori Devlin, glad you're here. Appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Mark.
All right. So everybody knows about this heroin and opioid addiction problem that we got in Louisville, all over the country, really. What impact has that had on the babies being born across the country?
Well, our babies that are exposed to opioids in utero end up having a withdrawal syndrome called NOWS, or neonatal opiate withdrawal syndrome. This used to be called NAS, or neonatal abstinence syndrome. The terminology has been changed because people are using NAS for multiple drugs of abuse, where NOWS is specific for opiates. What happens with our babies is they are passively exposed to opiates in utero as fetuses, and as developing fetuses, their brains are immature, and exactly what happens to their brains and the impact that we're seeing needs to be further studied. But these children may require not a whole lot. They may require non-pharmacologic care, which would be things such as staying with their mothers in dark, quiet rooms, breastfeeding and such, or they may have severe symptoms and require pharmacological intervention and pharmacologic treatment, which is primarily opioid replacement.
Right. I'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes here, but let's talk about the problem as it's blossomed, I guess, since, 2002. You did a paper about this. You talked about how the problem has just ballooned. So talk a little bit about that, where we were back in the early 2000s to where we are now with this opioid abuse and its impact on babies.
Sure, absolutely. So people in the United States consume more opiates per capita than anywhere else in the entire world. In fact, we're probably twice the amount per capita as Canada, which is the second most common opioid consuming country. So in 2012 alone, there were 259 million prescriptions that were written and dispensed for opioids in the United States. That averages about 82.5 prescriptions per 100 patients.
Jesus.
Now, there's areas that are much higher, the South being one of them, that can range all the way up to 143 opioid prescriptions per 100 people. Here in Kentucky, the latest data shows about 120 opioid prescriptions per 100 people, which is astronomical and something that we really need to be aware of. Every 3 minutes, a woman in the United States seeks ER care for opioid abuse. And that's opioid misuse of prescription opioids. And in addition to that, we also have a problem with illicit opioids. About 600,000 people in 2015 went in for treatment, and they identified heroin as their number one substance of abuse.
Right. So everybody's, I think, aware of those kinds of numbers. It's just become a huge problem. But the problem that you're specifically focusing on is pregnant women.
Correct.
Right? And so how many pregnant women, or what percentage of pregnant women, at least in the latest studies, are showing up giving birth to babies who are basically addicted to opioids because their moms have been?
About 28% of those that are on private insurance and about 39% of those that are on Medicaid actually are having issues and problems with perinatal opioid use.
Wait, whoa. So basically 1 out of every 3 women who are delivering babies in the United States are having problems with opioid abuse?
Well, not that many. Not that
Okay.
many. So, but 28% of those that are on private insurance and 39% of those that are on Medicaid. It's not a combination factor, but the majority of the people that we are seeing are usually Medicaid issues and problems, and it comes from the fact that the rural and the underserved individuals in the United States really have a significant challenge with this.
So that's not just Kentucky, that's everywhere.
Correct.
But in Kentucky, it's worse.
Kentucky, it's worse.
All right. So I still can't get over that number, though. 28% of the women nationwide who are delivering babies that have private insurance So one in almost every three have some sort of opioid problem or had some opioids in their bloodstream when they delivered the baby, correct?
It's an invasive issue and an invasive problem for certain.
That's a staggering number. I mean, that to me, it stuns me. I thought it would be like, maybe 10% or something like that. I guess that's just a staggering number.
Yeah.
So how do you get to the point where these women understand or can get off opioids before they get pregnant, or when they get pregnant they say, "Ooh, I got to quit"?
Yeah.
It's just not that easy, I guess.
No, and it's really not. The addictive power of opioids is extreme, and a lot of women cannot come off of the medication. When they find out that they're pregnant, it's not appropriate to come off. They need to be in a treatment program at that point in time. And their babies will have withdrawal issues and withdrawal problems, but if they can pull their lives together, they have the rest of their life to be able to take care of their child, which is much more important that we give these children good long-term outcomes than it is that we really prevent withdrawal per se.
Wow. We're talking with Dr. Lori Devlin, who's in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Louisville. We're talking about a paper that she wrote called A Practical Approach to Neonatal Opiate Withdrawal Syndrome. What are some of the other things in this study that you think were most interesting to you that you found and you kind of smacked your forehead and said, gee, I can't believe that?
Well, one of the challenges that we have is the challenges of just providing clinical care. As you know, every baby is unique, and the presentation for every child is different, and response to therapy is different. If it was completely and totally uniform, we would be able to say, hey, here's one treatment, here's one way to go, and everything would be taken care of, but that is really not the case. It's often difficult and maybe even impossible for us to be able to determine what drugs were used during pregnancy if mom's been on street drugs. And oftentimes, because of legal ramification and social stigma, moms don't want to share with us that there's been other co-exposures that have happened. The co-exposures that we know that cause issues and cause problems are benzodiazepines, which would be Xanax type of medications. Gabapentin is one of those medications. Antidepressants such as serotonin reuptake inhibitors such as Prozac can be another medication that causes an issue. And a big issue and a big problem here in the state of Kentucky is nicotine. That makes things worse as well. And so that is an issue and a challenge. And then genetics actually plays a role in this as well. Some recent studies have come out looking at the babies in particular and finding that there are specific SNPs, which are just little tiny pieces of the DNA that are changed and are actually inherited from the mother and the father and given to the baby, which complicate withdrawal and lead to worse addiction as adults. In addition to that, there are actually epigenetic changes, which are...
There are what?
Epigenetic changes.
Easy for me to say.
Which basically is hypermethylation. It doesn't change the DNA per se, but it activates or inactivates proteins, which leads to worse withdrawal issues and withdrawal problems.
So there's it's not just that a woman walks in and she's addicted to heroin and she's delivering these children. She has perhaps genetic exposure or changes. She's maybe a smoker. She could be taking other drugs. There are a myriad of other things that could impact the health of that baby.
Absolutely.
Okay. And what are the main problems caused by the development or by opioids that cause development problems in those children, those babies?
And that's a really good question, Mark. I think at this point in time we know some of them, but we have a whole lot more research that we need to do. We know that withdrawal is one of those issues and one of those problems, but it's short-lived, and it's something that will take care of itself as long as we don't end up having seizures or failure to thrive. Typically, with a little bit of help from us as medical providers. The issues and challenges that we're really dealing with is these kids are going home to maybe not the best social environment and may not be getting the appropriate care when they go home. And so what's happening with them long term? And the answer is we don't know the answer to that. We have a little bit of information, but we definitely do not have enough information on long-term outcomes yet, and that's some areas that we're working on.
Right. And one thing you mentioned in your paper, with children with multiple drug exposures, which includes opiates and others, have smaller brains, thinner cortices, reduced cognitive ability, and more behavioral problems. Are those results of past studies that we know that for a fact if there are multiple drugs involved?
Yes,
with the mom?
those are results of past studies. The big question becomes, is it environment? Is it exposure? And the answer to that is we don't know.
And about 80% of the babies get some sort of drugs to withdraw them from the abuser, right?
So about 50 to 80%.
50 to 80%? Okay.
So the numbers are actually moving now down towards 50 and 60%, which is good. We're using lots of non-pharmacological care. We actually have a separate unit over at the Children's Hospital and separate rooms over at University of Louisville where we put these babies so they can be in a dark, controlled, quiet environment. We encourage their mothers to come and stay with them if they can do that. But if you're in the midst of opioid addiction, sometimes that's not even close to being possible. The nurses spend lots of time consoling and being with these kids. If mom is in a treatment program, then she'll go ahead and provide breast milk. If she's on illicit opioids, then breast milk is not an appropriate feeding for that baby. But we try with non-pharmacological management to avoid or at least decrease the incidence of pharmacologic management, which would be opioid replacement therapy.
Gotcha. All right, so what kind of research are you doing now?
Okay, so right now we're actually working with the NIH. We are doing a trial called ACT Now, which is Advancing Clinical Trials in Neonatal Opioid Withdrawal Syndrome. And basically it's a study that's funded by the NIH to look at the gaps in the care for babies with NAS. And it's both the Neonatal Research Network and the IDEA states, and we are one of 17 IDEA states. And the IDEA states were developed for those populations that were treating patients that were rural and underserved. And so we're doing a lot of work with that, and I'm representing our university on the committee for this protocol moving forward, and hopefully before too much longer we'll have the largest trial on NOWS that's ever been done in the United States.
And when you get that, what do you hope to find?
What do you
hope to do with it?
Yeah, what we hope to do is we hope to improve the short and long-term outcomes for our babies with NOWS.
Okay, let's hope so. All right, Lori Devlin, appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you much, Mark.
I'm here with Suki Kim, who is a journalist. She was born in South Korea and now lives in the United States. And she spent 5 months of her life working at a school in North Korea, sort of undercover, and she was documenting her time there in North Korea and with the students she had in North Korea, and has written a book about it called With You, There Is No Us. She was a guest on UofL's campus, and in Louisville, she was a guest of the Center for Asian Democracy and gave a speech last night that everybody enjoyed, with lots of folks there, and she's here talking to me now. So, Suki, I'm glad you're in Louisville.
Hello, hi.
Have you ever been in Louisville before?
No, it's my first time.
First time. All right. So what do you think of Louisville? From what you've seen.
The audience was very friendly. You seem to be they're into sports here a lot.
Yes, we are.
And it's very lively.
Okay. Kind of give some background on why you had so much interest as a journalist going into North Korea and seeing what's really going on inside North Korea. Why the passion for that?
Well, first I was born in South Korea into a family that had been separated by the war. So there's a personal interest. Having gone there since 2002, I also learned quickly that it's impossible to cover it because all you ever get is propaganda. From talking to many defectors, you also realize the horrific condition inside. Yet the fact that it's totally inaccessible means you have to be embedded. So that pursuit of trying to get to the heart of the place, I guess, fed the obsession in some sense, and also because it's really a brutal world, and it's the most horrific place, really, according to the United Nations.
Mm-hmm. And so you wound up at this school teaching English at this school. How did you get to a school in North Korea teaching English to 19 and 20-year-old boys?
So during my decade-long research, I'd been there a couple of times. And from one of my visits, I learned about an organization that is funded and run by an fundamental evangelical Christians who are setting up a university in North Korea. And I then began quoting that organization as a journalist to see if I can be a part of them. And as a volunteer, really, unpaid position as a teacher to live there. And then I was miraculously approved to go teach.
Because you're not a fundamentalist Christian, we should say that, right?
Neither am I an ESL teacher. But, the undercover method, according to the Society of Professional Journalists, the ethics code does state, if the information is vital to the public, which this is, and if there's no other way of getting to the information, when the traditional journalism really only works as, in many sense, a propaganda for the North Korean regime at this point, then there is no other way to cover a place that is all full of propaganda and lies. You do have to be choose another method. Untraditional in this sense is an undercover method.
It's a closed country, closed society. It's closed everything in North Korea. There's no access to the outside world, right?
There's no access to the outside world, and any access that is the minimal access is all controlled and manipulated by the regime. So that's why it's really it's a foreign policy nightmare, but it's also a journalistic nightmare because you don't really want to do, if you want to write a press release to sell something, which journalism can be used to do very often, you don't want to do that for the world's most brutal regime.
Right. We're talking with Suki Kim, who's a journalist and spent some time in North Korea, wrote a book about it, and talked about her experiences here in Louisville as a guest of the Center for Asian Democracy at the University of Louisville. Describe some of your experiences with your students. These were 19 and 20-year-old boys. They were from families that were the upper echelon of North Korean culture. But kind of describe what it was like talking to them, what they knew, what they asked of you. What was the dialogue that you had with these students?
Well, I lived in a military guarded compound with them and not allowed out, really, without the minder. So my life there was really eating 3 meals a day with them, playing basketball with them in just such close intimacy in a way. And, they never wanted to talk about it. I mean, they can't. They have no, I wasn't allowed to tell them anything. They weren't allowed to ask any questions.
So there were people watching you and listening to you at all times, correct?
At all times, yeah. And also the rooms are bugged and classroom is recorded and reported on. The system of surveillance is in every step. The lesson plans are approved by the North Korean staff. The minder who watches my every move lived downstairs from me 24/7. So that system really, is dictated in a way that you just really can't say anything. But because I lived with them, for months and months and months, some things come up where they begin to say things that they might not necessarily say. In the beginning, it's all about the great leader, and slowly, their interior world opens up, which is really, they were just really vulnerable 19, 20-year-olds who really had never been allowed to do anything. The fact that they didn't know what the internet was, and they were computer majors. In the beginning, they all pretended they knew what it was. But through living with them, slowly you realize they have no idea what that is. So, I mean, that kind of darkness, how you keep that information from the country's leading generation of young men,
right,
future leadership, suggests a lot about what that world is.
And at the time you were there, it was 2011, we should mention, and it was Kim Jong-il who was the leader. What is it called? The great leader, I think is what everybody calls. And there were pictures of him everywhere. Everything, according to you, was almost like, I think you described it as godlike. Is that a fair assessment, the view of Kim Jong-il?
It's a cult ideology, yes. So he's, it doesn't really matter whether it's Kim Jong-il or now Kim Jong-un and their grandfather, Kim Il-sung. All these guys are basically the great leader figures, only just the character changes. It's 3 generations of them. And they are they're not presidents, really. They're really like the mythical character. And everything is that it's been created by the God Almighty way is how it is built, the brand of the great leader. So they only celebrate really the great leader's birthday. They only sing songs about the great leader. All television is only about the great leader, and one newspaper every article is about the great leader. So I mean, really, everyone wears the badge of the great leader, and it dictates everything about them.
And I guess growing up in that culture, these students didn't know anything different, did they? There was no way for them to know anything other than the great leader is this wonderful person. My country is the greatest place on earth. There's no way for them to know anything different, is there?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a religious way, like, because I'm actually not religious. Like, if it's sort of equated to God sense, then it's the reason for their being. They've been created really because of the solicitude, they call it, of the great leader. And North Korea has been like this for 70 years. So what that means is 3 generations of this. And so it's not only that this is all you know, but it's also what your father has only known this world too.
Do the North Korean people that you got to meet, the limited number that you did they hate Americans?
I think that's a complicated question. I'm American, and they adored me on an individual sense.
But was it because you were born in South Korea, you have Korean looks, and you speak Korean?
No, because there were half of the faculty were
Okay.
Americans, white Americans, and New Zealander or Brits or whatever. So, on an individual sense, none of that ever came into an issue. But their foundation of their philosophy of the great leader is built on the concept that the great leader is great because he protects them from the imperialist America that has divided the Korean peninsula. So that is a propaganda. It's actually based on some truth, because it's the United States that had divided Korea, which then led to the Korean War. So because the dictatorship that has settled in North Korea is built on the idea of the hatred of the United States, it's mixed in. It's not that these, young 20-year-old men hate America. It's not really that. It's that their foundation of their nation is built on it.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what they get, because there's no contact with the outside world. There's no other way for them to hear anything else, is there, except to have contact with people like you?
Well, if you were to understand it as actually a state philosophy, if actually the attack that is imminent by the United States is how the great leader's myth is upheld. The great leader myth, it's actually a myth, right, to create this character and has now become the God Almighty of North Korea. If that entire thing is built on the imperialism of the United States, then the whole thing is just sort of mixed so fundamentally together.
Talking with Suki Kim, who's a journalist and spent some time in North Korea in 2011, wrote a book about it, and she was a guest at the University of Louisville at the Center for Asian Democracy, one of the many great speakers that the University of Louisville brings to our fair city of Louisville. A couple other questions. You now have a brand new leader, Kim Jong-un, but you still have, North Korea is a closed-off society, not getting news of the outside world. What are they hearing about this battle of words between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump over North Korea, potentially building nuclear weapons? Do you think they're getting any of that, and what would be their view, even if they are?
I mean, anything to do with America is, always portrayed in the North Korean sense as the imperialist America that wants to destroy North Korea or the Korean peninsula. In this case, actually, the current president has said that he will totally destroy North Korea using fire and fury. So that's actually verbatim fitting directly into the propaganda of North Korea. Imagine, I think that it's important to recognize that is a North Korean propaganda that's used to subjugate the people there. These are 25 million citizens. So the dictatorship surrounding the idea of the great leader would absolutely use what the president of the United States is currently saying to bolster their own propaganda. So absolutely every North Korean must be hearing about this right now.
And so Donald Trump's words are feeding right into the propaganda of the North Koreans.
It's very helpful for the great leader to use it to subjugate his people.
When you came out of this experience, you wrote a book about it, as I said, Without You, There Is No Us by Suki Kim. It was a New York Times bestseller. Did the CIA or anybody from the American government ever come to you and sit down and do an interview with you and ask you about the North Korean people?
Never.
You surprised by that?
It's been a mystery, actually, because I thought that they would be interested. Because the whole idea, you have all these experts sitting in their armchair in DC discussing whether, are they going to attack us? Are they not going to attack us? I don't know how many of them have spent any time with the future leadership in proximity who speak Korean. So I was really surprised, actually, that none of them have approached me. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's their job description, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd think they want to talk to you anyways, because the journalists that are going into North Korea now are getting that watered-down view, only taken to places where the North Koreans want to take them, so they're really not getting any view at all. You had to go undercover to get the true view of the citizens and what they're thinking, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's never been done. A professional writer actually being embedded in North Korea with especially the future leadership during the regime change time. These were literally the future leaders of North Korea, and what they're thinking is always what, these experts are either on Fox TV or MSNBC, guessing the whole time. Really, it's guessing. What else is that? But so I'm really surprised that you would think that they're getting paid to really know more about the subject, which is North Korea, for them to get paid. Really, it's their job. So I'm really surprised that none of them really seemed to care.
Do you have any hope that there will ever be any sort of uprising or shot at democracy or opening up of society in North Korea anytime in the next 20, 30, 40 years?
I mean, I think that having, I don't know, as much as I could, of a decade of trying to understand their psychology and living with those young men is so psychologically damaged that 70 years of this military dictatorship where they can't even travel between towns, only learning about the great leader and being isolated to this degree. I don't know how you rise above that. I hope so, because I think that that's the only hope we've got, that North Korean travesty against human rights, that is North Korea, will be discontinued. I don't see any other way that will end if not the people of North Korea somehow changes.
And that's probably not going to happen, is it? You're not optimistic, are you?
I am not optimistic, but I'm not also optimistic for the foreign powers surrounding it to have any willingness to really end that system either. It's been a standstill problem.
Gotcha. Suki Kim, thanks for coming to the University of Louisville. Heck of a story. Hope you enjoyed that interview with Suki Kim, the South Korean journalist who went inside North Korea as an undercover teacher, essentially. That'll about do it for this edition of UofL Today with Mark Hebert, which you can hear every Monday and Tuesday night at 6 on 93.9 The Ville, or you can catch the podcast on SoundCloud. Also, some of the broadcasts show up on Metro TV, which is Louisville's government access channel, and on KETKY throughout the week. I'll see you Monday mornings on WHAS TV's Great Day Live with Terry Miners and Rachel Platt, where I always have some new and hopefully interesting story about the great research, students, or something cool going on at the University of Louisville. Thanks for joining us for UofL Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards!